in 1978, when my grandfather was in the RAAF and my dad was only 2 years old, my grandfather was posted in Butterworth Air Base in Malaysia with my dad and grandma, where they proceeded to live for the next 2 years. When my grandma and grandfather left Canberra on a freezing July morning on a chartered flight, they started a new journey which would take them through the next 2 years. When they arrived in Malaysia, they were lucky enough to be given a house on Penang Island, which meant that my granddad had to go to work on the mainland, which he got to by ferry because there was no bridge at the time. With my granddad at work, this left my grandma, my 2-year-old dad, and his newly born sister to explore the island and the mainland. Every RAAF member was assigned a ama, or a maid, who either lived or came during the day to help with the housework. The ama was assigned 6 out of the 7 days of the week to help around the house by cleaning, washing the dishes, or ironing. There was also a man who would shop for the family. All my grandma had to do was put a shopping list in the front door, and the man would come by and take the shopping list and then go around to all the markets and shops to collect the items. He would then return to the house and drop off the groceries when he could. There are many differences between Australia and Malaysia. For one, there are no supermarkets, but there are these things called open air markets. These are outdoor shops that would line the streets. Nothing could be refrigerated, so you had to get there early as most of the food was sold frozen as not to spoil. There would be many shops that would line the street or come around twice a day to sell things like fresh meat or fish. You could even buy everyday things from these people, like haircuts, shoes, and books. There were tailors that would take the measurements of your feet and make your shoes right there. Instead of massive shopping malls, there was these tiny shops that had almost anything you could think of. There are many cultures and celebrations inside of Malaysia. The main 2 cultures are Hindu and Chinese. They hold many different festivals and celebrations. One of the biggest festivals in Malaysia is Chinese New Year, which takes place in February. The second biggest celebration is an Indian event called Thaipusam, which is a celebration of prayers and penance, which is a punishment inflicted on oneself as an outward expression of representing of wrongdoing. The unique culture was a shock to my grandma because of the incredibly different way of life that the Malaysian people had. Many families lived in houses suspended above the ground by stilts because of the wet weather and flooding. Most houses had around 2 to 3 families living in a small space. The parents went to work and the grandparents would look after the kids. Isolation from family back home was hard for my grandma and her family. Before coming to Malaysia, my grandparents expected a big language gap that would make it hard to communicate, but most of the locals ended up being able to speak English, which made their time in Malaysia significantly easier. Coming out of Malaysia, my grandma learned a lot. From the culture to the diversity, there was so much she understood now. Through living away from family and friends, my grandma came to appreciate them more. She also gained a greater perspective in regards to priorities and degrees of importance. She learned to appreciate the freedom and the standards of living we enjoy every day in Australia that we take for granted. In the end, living in Malaysia for 2 years was a life-changing experience for my grandma and her family.